Welcome back to another episode of Worldbuilding Praxis, where we are building a fantasy world from scratch for use as a D&D campaign setting. In episode 1, we made sure we understood the various decisions that need to be made about pantheons and planar systems. In this episode, we're going to actually make them. Before we do that though, I want to spend a little bit of time talking about step 0. I don't think I did a very good job explaining what I was doing, so here's a quick recap. Step 0 entails creating an empty table, which will eventually be filled in by the deities of your pantheon. The x-axis represents time, while the y-axis represents some system or group of things. They can be literally whatever nouns you want, but I decided to make mine loosely based off of the 4 parts of a classical Western chorus. The idea is for your fundamental forces, or the things inhabiting the y-axis, to change slightly over the course of your table, until it eventually starts over, creating a cycle. There are 2 main reasons I added this step to the world building process. First, it gives us a bit of direction when coming up with deities for our pantheon, who will inhabit all of these empty boxes we just created. It is, in my experience, much easier to fill in the blanks of a table like this, which has 3 descriptors per cell, than it is to just come up with 16 cohesive deities off the top of your head. Second, making one of our axes represent time provides us with a cycle, or a repeating pattern of cosmological proportions. Long-term cycles like this, I'm talking centuries at least, are very useful going forward in the world-building process. They will help us organize our planar system, divide our world's timeline into eras, and write the histories of our ancient civilizations. Having a repeating cosmological pattern like this will also be invaluable once we start writing adventures. A lot of adventures, and a lot of fantasy stories in general, include a specific window of time when some big fantastical thing can happen. Stop me if you've heard this before. The planes have reached a particular orientation which allows easier travel between them. So a bunch of cultists are trying to summon Tiamat. The outer planets have aligned for the first time in hundreds of years. So Hades uses this chance to locate and free the Titans, sparking a war in heaven. Once every 100 years, a comet passes so close to the Earth that it makes the firebenders really strong. Most of the adventures you write will include what the Dungeon Master's Guide calls world-shaking events, either as the inciting incident which causes the A-plot, or possibly as a historical event which serves as a backdrop for the whole campaign setting. Many of these world-shaking events can be reinforced by or attributed to some such repeating cosmological pattern. These cycles also have the added bonus of giving our players a chance to find historical examples of whatever they're dealing with, since if it's part of a cycle, it has happened before. I mentioned that I used a 4-part chorus as inspiration for my fundamental forces, but since this step is going to be so different for everyone, and I'm not Adam Neely, I'm not going to go too far into that. The important thing is that I came up with these labels for each row and column. Once you have defined your axes, you can slap on some alignments which you think make sense, or just put them in at random. Now you have 3 descriptors to help you come up with some deities: the force, its phase, and its alignment. Because it's one of the simpler setups, I'm going to be using a bottom-up absolute pantheon. If these terms don't mean anything to you, check out the Pantheon video. I took a look at the descriptors I had come up with for each cell, which will correspond to 1 deity each. At this point of the process, I like to jot down some archetypes which make sense in each box. This isn't strictly necessary, but a nice one-word portrait of each deity helps me going forward. Praxis's pantheon will be an animal zodiac. So now I need to fill in our organizer with each deity's corresponding animal. Our zodiac is going to be functional as well as fantastical. Remember, whenever we say the name of one of our deities, we want there to be a comma something after it. Sometimes this is an aspect, like Thor, god of thunder. Sometimes it is an epithet, like Godric the grafted. But in the case of Praxis, it will be the deity's corresponding animal. This will help solidify our pantheon in our players' minds. Our deities will have proper names eventually, but those will come from our ancient civilizations' naming languages, which we will tackle in step 3. Remember, if you come across anything you don't like that you came up with in a previous step, feel free to change it. My rule of thumb is that unless it has been said at the table, it is not yet canon. Once we know what gods we're going to include in our pantheon, we can start fleshing them out a little bit. We want to use this step to get to know our own deities. A small level of comfort with those inhabiting our pantheon will help us get a better idea of the dynamics of our planar system. It might also give us a few ideas for some large-scale conflicts in our world's history. Starting out, I like to expound a bit on each deity by jotting down some ideas or concepts that will be closely associated with them. I also like to include groups of individuals which are inherently protected or favored by each deity. Once your party starts adventuring, these protected groups can give some spice to your game. If your player's characters run afoul of one of them, they can incur the wrath of a deity's faithful, or even the deity itself. I'm sure you've noticed by now, but many of the things we are doing in the world building process are providing us with writing fuel for the future. Next, we're going to consider which cleric domains make sense for each god. As I've mentioned, I'm usually pretty lenient when letting clerics choose their domains. As long as the player can give an in-universe reason that at least sort of makes sense, I'll allow it. The only thing which would cause me to disallow a particular domain from a deity would be if they were diametrically opposed. The god of life probably doesn't have any death clerics. Also, while listing each deity's suggested domains, I try to make sure none are over or underrepresented. While developing the deities in our pantheon, we should consider how popular each one will be. For example, your goddesses of health and harvest are probably pretty popular. On the other hand, your goddesses of famine and death are probably a little less popular, possibly to the point of being taboo. It doesn't fit into every DM's religious structure, but having a few socially forbidden deities can go a long way once we start writing adventures. When the mayor's butler is revealed to be a death cultist, that revelation will hit much harder if your players are already familiar with the deity the cult is devoted to. A third distinction we should consider are fringe deities. These are the little weirdo gods who don't really have that many followers. Depending on your religious structure, this could mean anything from an esoteric greater deity to a vestige. A cool bit of flavor we can include in our games are rundown little shrines or buried temples devoted to gods your players don't recognize. So deciding which deities are not commonly known can help us later on. For whatever reason, gods like this are often associated with things like fate, precognition, and contacting the spirit world. We aren't obligated to follow these trends, but it is helpful to understand what our players might expect or intuit. For some extra credit, you can design some symbols for the deities in your pantheon. My visual art abilities don't go much farther than map making, so what I like to do is take a photo of what I'm trying to symbolize, find some geometric shapes in it, and emphasize those, hopefully resulting in something recognizable. Finally, I like to come up with a sentence or two about each deity. This can be purely flavor for you to recite to your player when they roll a particularly high religion check, but I like to include some function in this blurb as well. Specifically, the situation or situations in which a person in your campaign setting would most likely come across said deity. Some of these are pretty straightforward. Most goddesses of wealth will have many shrines or temples at which people can go pray when times get tough. But others might be more specific. Like, if someone is being pursued at dawn or dusk, the goddess of twilight has been known to whisk them away to a far corner of the planar system. Once we have become a little more acquainted with our deities, we can take a look at organizing our pantheon. I think it makes sense to have at least two layouts. One that is organized by alignment, and one that is overlaid onto your planar system. Our first organizer should look familiar even to non-D&D folks. The alignment chart, love it or hate it, is still probably the best way to introduce your pantheon to your players. Unless, of course, your deities do not follow the alignment system. It all fits on one page, there are no walls of text, and it's easy to refer to if your players forget which deity is which. Next, we'll insert our Pantheon into our planar system. Whether you're going with a basic one deity per plane system or something a little more complicated, it makes sense to know how your Pantheon fits into your cosmology. You're free to use any cosmology you like, but this structure, which groups the deities into larger outer planes, is one I've come to really like, so I'll be using it for Praxis. An added bonus of this structure is that we already did most of the work in step 0. I grouped the columns of our first organizer together into the outer planes and ordered them based on our phases. You can see our cycles starting to take shape. Hopefully without too much trouble, we are finished with step 1. We have a general idea of each of our deities' identities and their place in the planar system. We also have 2 visuals we can show our players, and we are well on our way to having a table-ready campaign setting. Next time, in step 2, we'll do the world building part of the world building process, designing our planet as well as its geography. Thanks for watching, everybody. Had fun getting back to the D&D and world building stuff. If you want to support me, you can do all the normal stuff down here, or you can head over to the DM's Guild and pick up a copy of Principles of Shamanism. See you.